I'm getting a connecting, starting recording, ...
Yep, I'm getting the same thing. Okay. Can you see me?
Looks like we're live. So we're going to get rolling here. I can see you.
All right. Cool. Technical difficulties to
All right,
start the
let's
thing
do
off.
this.
That's just how it goes.
Yeah, that's all right. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. We got a first here tonight and having a guest here on One American's Perspective, and I'm honored that it's my best friend, Nic Rogers. You might know him from a podcast and a channel he's got on YouTube, Milk N Bourbon, where he'll review books and talk with interesting people, myself included, from time to time, and just have a good time. So very charismatic guy. He's got a lot of good experience that I wanted to have on the show, and he graciously accepted to talk about a hot topic issue, especially, unfortunately, given today's date, October 25th, yesterday on the 24th, there was another mass shooting in St. Louis where a gunman claimed the lives of a student and a teacher at a high school there. We did not know that when we decided on the topic. Unfortunately, this is one of those things that with these mass shootings nowadays, you see so frequently that, you're hard pressed to not be between shootings whenever you bring up a topic. So because it's a tough issue and it brings up gun control and gun rights advocates, wanted to talk with Nic a little bit about today, just get his perspective as we're trying to seek out a truthful ground amongst each other and amongst whoever's watching this. So Nic, thanks for coming on. I'll start with the first question, kind of a broad question, and you just open it up whatever avenue you feel appropriate or to the level of depth you feel necessary. What is your opinion of current gun restrictions and rights at this point in the United States?
Right. So I wanted to first start off with the fact that we have a fairly similar background. You actually mentioned this in one of your video series already, in that we come from a relatively privileged background. And I wanted to start with that. I do think that we have very different opinions on certain things, and we've actually discussed hashing those out in a forum like this in the past. So I do think that what we're trying to do, we're truth seekers, or at least as close to the truth as you can get. And I will say this, with gun restrictions, my point of view is that there's 26 states that have you have to have a permit, and then there's the rest of the 24 have some sort of background check to some extent, but it varies fairly greatly across the states. If you ask me about my experience buying in one of these states, it almost seemed like a hand wave. I bought a weapon for my dad for Christmas, and I mean, I'm telling you, it was rapid, and it was a little bit concerning even to me at the time.
What state was that in?
It was in Kentucky.
Just out of curiosity.
Okay. It was in Kentucky. Yeah. So, but my stance on gun restrictions.
Now, sorry for the listeners, if you don't mind me interjecting, just for the listeners. So, do you have a Kentucky residency? And just wondering if that plays into any of the level of difficulty.
I do. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you use that.
Yeah, I just don't know what the effect was of my residency on it, because it was.
Okay.
I said that I wanted a gun. They ran a background check, and within a very short amount of time, it was mine.
Was it a pistol or a rifle?
It was a pistol.
Okay. All right. Just a couple details that I know. Aficionados on this topic will always kind of pick out some of those pieces, and sometimes they matter. So please continue.
Yeah. So the thing that I wanted to bring up with gun restrictions is the federal government has chose to let the states lead the charge for their states. And I like that. I fully support the fact that most of the large decisions such as that should be residing in the state level, because I think the state representatives more accurately represent their people than the federal government. Also, I'm not a huge fan of having a very large federal government. So that is in line with my opinion. What I'll tell you is that it has shown that there are states that respond very well. And I wanted to lead off with statistics can be very misleading at times when they're framed in certain ways. So people can use statistics as a weapon. But what I'll tell you is right off the rip, if you just look at it, California leads the nation in violent mass shooting deaths. But I can also tell you that when it's adjusted per capita, they're 44th. And then I can further on say that since they've enacted requiring a permit in order to get a weapon in their state, they've reduced, over the past 25 years, they've cut gun deaths in half, or at least mass shooting gun deaths in half. So you can look at it at face value and say, oh, California leads the nation in these gun deaths, these mass shootings, but it's been drastically reduced. And when adjusting for the amount of people, the sheer amount of people that are in California, it's almost dead last. So do I think that gun restrictions are in the best place right now? No. I think that there are some very large misgivings to how gun control affects something like mass shootings. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I do say that like there's been signs of this improving the state. And I can tell, I don't want to go too far into it because I think you have some questions residing in that, and maybe like some quantifying questions as well.
Okay, cool. So if I can just kind of read back as I'm figuring out how to do this Q&A type of format for my own edification, that, you know, guns rights are something that are inherent in the American Constitution, even though you didn't say this. I'm just going to, because we've talked around this before, and just to kind of put it all out there for anybody that might be listening, that it is inherent right provided by the federal Constitution, the
Right.
U.S. Constitution, that is, for American citizens that are of age, non-convicted felons, you know, check a few of these basic boxes as their right to own a handgun. However, not delineated by the federal government, and in your opinion shouldn't be outlined by the federal government on how they go about doing that. And that is a policy and level of decision making that should be kept at the states, who are better suited to know their constituency and how to best service any type of gun control that they designate is required. Furthermore, some level of gun control may actually help to save lives and reduce the amount of violent crime in the states that administer those gun control laws or policies. Is that generally speaking kind of what your
A wonderful
frame
synopsis.
references come from? Perfect. All right, A+ for my paper.
Oh yeah.
We'll go on from there. So talking more specifically about mass shootings, why do you think they occur so frequently these days? Do you think it's a gun technology problem, i.e. because we have more powerful weapons, handguns, and rifles than we've ever had before, that the mass shootings occur so frequently and on such a scale that we haven't seen before? Is it a lack of social values or a degradation of social values? Is it due to mental health crisis in the country, or is it maybe a lack of security? You know, maybe the targets that are being hit are soft targets, and if we just beefed up security around these locations, then we would eliminate shootings. So if you can go ahead and riff on that for a second, that'd be great.
I can. I think a couple of different things. I'll try to address this one at a time. The first question you asked is, why is it happening so frequently? And I will contend with you on that, in that frequently compared to what? Because I'll tell you, in 2021, there were 690-ish deaths from mass shootings. And while there should be zero, 692 deaths in a year compared to, I mean, any number of things is very small. For instance, Lightning strikes claim around 10,000 people's lives a year across the globe. Yes, but like if you're considering the United States as well, hippos kill 2,900 people a year, and with a 0.0000014% chance of having some sort of like mass cow with an airplane, you have about 1,200 deaths a year for airplanes. If you're comparing gun deaths, you're getting close to the amount of deaths that happen usually from like these large crowds that happen on Black Friday. That happens about 550 deaths per year. So when you say frequently, yes, it's increased, and yes, that's a terrible thing, and it should be zero. But I think that what's happening is that media coverage of these things is so sensationalized that the onus, or I guess the focus, has become these mass shootings. And because it's so emotional of an event, or emotional of a topic, people buy into it. It's what media is trying to make money. So I think that what's happening is that they're sensationalizing it in order to make more money, increase their viewership. Now, we can definitely debate that, but I do want to address these other things. Gun technology, on a commercial basis, I think it's hard for me to riff on this because I don't think the gun technology is at the level where a pistol and a rifle, in a lot of the places that these events happen, churches, movie theaters. When you think about a church or a movie theater, like the max distance from front to back, unless you're a mega church, is not much more than 30, 40 meters. And pistols can reach that range. So I don't think that having a technologically superior rifle in these areas grants a large advantage. Now, social values and a mental, I'll try to group these two together just because I don't want to overstay my welcome here on one American's perspective. But social values and mental health, I want to say that mental health is certainly an issue right now in America, and I think the causes for it are myriad. There's so many, and I think that the onus of pinpointing the people that suffer from these mental illnesses that should not be handling a weapon or should not own a weapon is not on the federal government, and it's really difficult for the state government to address that as well. So I think it's on a citizen level to try to prevent these people from having access to these guns. So I'll try to wrap it up there. There's a lot of things that I said. I don't know which one you want to bring up because it's a hot topic issue, and there's so many things that lend to it that it makes it difficult to address the problem.
Yeah, I like all those takes on those, and I will kind of add some things on each one of them individually. The first of which being is the rate. So while I do agree that the media chooses those because they're specifically heinous and because I think they can raise a large amount of viewership on them, and it ends to make money. Like no argument there. However, since Columbine, the frequency and the occurrence of these is unprecedented in American history. So they are happening. Now, I love how you framed the overall size of the problem when compared to mortality rates from every, in any other scope, and it understood. And that's something that I think the skewed perspective of the media does they're the antithesis of providing the accurate information about the likelihood of being killed in any type of gun violence, being it mass shooting or not. But rightly so, they do focus on that, and there's a reason why it's so popular. Is because the mind behind a mass shooter and the motive behind that is so strange. People, oddly enough, can understand gang violence. There's no great mystery there, and this is an opinion of mine. They can understand domestic violence. There's no great mystery there, and people are killed by significant others or spouses or girlfriends or boyfriends, regularly in America too, using guns along with other weapons, in your major cities, in your Chicago's and New York's, where in your Los Angeles's, where, the gun control laws are the stricter than most other places in the U.S. You have a disproportionate amount of gun violence when not rated per capita, and I appreciate you also bringing that into effect. So those are things that, for whatever reason, the media doesn't put it out, and I think, it's a chicken or the egg type of thing. They don't put it out because Americans are like, well, that just makes sense. That figures. They didn't, the thousands that have died in the wars in the last 20 years, when people die in wars, they die by gunfire, they die by explosions. That just happens. So that's an interesting take on it. The second thing being the gun technology. While I agree, yeah, it's especially not hard in some of these confined places where you're literally shooting pigs in a barrel, and especially when you look at the mentality and the goals that are not really a secret. I mean, it's a pretty well studied trend analysis at this point with these mass shooters. The goal is to kill as many people as possible, and when you're indiscriminately shooting targets, it's really easy to hit anything up to 100 meters if you're just pointing in the general direction, and you don't care if you hit the person on the left or the person on the right. The technology, I think it is interesting because, you can't argue that if we all had, single action pistols
Right.
that held 6 shots, and you had to dump out the cartridges, that like the body count would be likely lower based purely off of, a time to reload. So probably the technology might come in most to play by the efficiency of the reload and the lack of potential misfires that you have there. But your point still stands. If you go into a crowded room and you're just trying to kill everybody that's in that room, you just spray and pray, and that's an effective strategy. Unfortunately, the good guys don't have that luxury where they can just shoot and not care who gets hit.
Right.
It's just not the way that our police or military are trained nowadays. But an interesting point, they specifically choose people that are looking to do this, these quote unquote mass shooters that are looking to do the most harm. They choose these locations because they're not idiots. And again, it's a trend analysis. They have many case studies to study and learn from, unfortunately, nowadays, where they pick crowded locations. They pick locations where people are going to be off their guard. Oftentimes they pick locations where they know there aren't going to be people that are carrying. They're soft targets. And in your world, in my former world, you call these soft targets. They pick them because they don't want a fair fight, and because they know they're going to be able to rack up a body count as quickly as they can before the cops come and end up taking their life. The mental health issue was the last one I think you talked about. I ultimately underlying this, and I'll kind of give away the prize here. I think underlying all this is some level of individual and societal disease, a lack of, and disease might not even be too strong of a word. I don't know what else I would call it, is a lack of empathy and caring on a societal level, an individual responsibility to live by any type of moral code, I think, or to an anti-moral code is what they prefer to live by. I mean, just the other day, I saw the police chief, I believe, for St. Louis reading a part of the letter that was left behind by the shooter, this murderer, and talking about how he never had friends and he was alone, and he was essentially a mass shooter in the making. And that to me reeks of some type of mental illness, and how we go about fixing that, I think opens a whole nother can of worms. But I think more than the gun rights or the gun control issue itself, underlying this particular subsect of gun violence, which is mass shooters, to me the fundamental problem is the mental health. And that'd be probably a total different episode and talk about what do we think are some of the factors that play there, and how do we go about fixing them, not being mental health professionals, and certainly not knowing all the pain and trials that everyone else in this country can go to. So moving on to the next question. so constitutional carry laws, for those that aren't familiar, some states are doing away with. I don't have the states in front of me right now. I imagine it's a pretty simple Google search. Prior to this constitutional laws being passed within the last year, I think maybe a couple of years, you had to apply for not just a permit to buy a gun, but a permit to carry a gun in a concealed manner, meaning that you don't have it open to the public. Some states allow what's called open carry, where I can wear a pistol on my hip as long as I purchase it legally and I'm legally allowed to carry. I can wear it into a store. I can wear it into Walmart if I want. But to carry it in a concealed manner, which has a tactical pros and cons, that is not necessarily the topic of this discussion. But some states have done away with that, where they say, well, if you're legally allowed to buy a gun, then you should be legally allowed to carry a gun in a concealed manner. What's your take on that?
On the ability to carry, are you talking about like the ability to carry guns in a concealed manner, or the permits required to do such?
Well, the ability to carry it without permitting. So the constitutional carry now being that as long it's an implied consent under the Constitution that if you're legally allowed to own a gun, you should be legally allowed to carry it in a concealable form.
Okay. Oh man, actually, I would say I believe that there. So I kind of have like two minds on this, and that's why this is so difficult to answer. The one side of me is saying the harder you make to get a gun, the more you're hurting the people that are actually trying to prevent things like this. Because what's going to happen is the people that do not care, that don't have a mind for the law, that are willing to kill other people in cold blood, is not going to be prevented by a federal law or state laws for that matter. So the only people that you're affecting with these are the people that are law-abiding citizens, for lack of a better term. So that's one side of my mind. The other side of the mind is I'm looking at the data from places like California, where it seems to have had an effect. And so in my mind, the way I see this is like, because people see the federal government as this like omniscient, and even the state governments, but more so federal government, see them as like these omniscient beings that can just prevent all these atrocities from happening. And I don't see them as anything but the same type of people that we are. They just happen to serve in a role that is demanded of them, like much more is demanded of them. So they're only as capable as the rest of us. Now, so I feel like I'm dancing around your question, and I'm not trying to. I wrestle with this problem a lot. I see that things have worked, such as this, in California, where they're highly restrictive. And then you can bring up places like Illinois, which are also highly restrictive. And then they're not doing nearly as well as California as far as preventing gun deaths. However, you can also point out, like everyone's going to say, well, how close is Chicago to Indiana, who has very lax gun laws, very, very lax stance on concealed carry, and how easy it is for people to just cross that state border to get those weapons. So I go back and forth, man. It's so hard for me to answer this question. I thought about it. I don't know. If you have an answer for this, please. I struggle with this.
Yeah, I do have an answer for it, and my opinion of it. But I want to address something you've been talking about with the California gun laws and the decreasing the rate of statistics. It's actually interesting. I didn't know that it had decreased per capita. That is interesting. One thing I will say, and I think it's important to recognize, I mean, you alluded to the Achilles heel of statistics, which is they're just numbers. Deriving meaning from them takes interpretation, and interpretation requires us to have a lens to see things. The problem with sociological statistics at large is, you're pulling them from an uncontrolled environment where there are boundless confounding variables. You're not in a lab where you're studying the direct causation of an independent variable and a dependent variable. So I wonder how many confounding variables there are to have lowered the gun rates. In addition to that, I would say, well, are you gaining a little bit of ground there in terms of less gun deaths, but really giving away a lot of ground in other aspects that will ultimately lead to more harm than good, specifically talking about individual liberties. We saw this with the pandemic, and that's not the intent of this podcast, but where, the ideas of security and freedom will always exist on opposite ends of the spectrum. And the more security you have, the less freedoms you have. And how much harm is done by the limitation that is placed on the individual freedoms in order to save some, to gain a little bit of added security. And it's not a simple answer, I think, to derive the perfect balance. And I do agree, that better than the federal government certainly is the state government to figure that out. But even a state government is in a state with over 50 million people, I think, is what California has, something like that.
Something close.
I can't remember how many. A large population. I mean, the largest population in the U.S. Hands down. There, and you're going to have the demand is going to outweigh the capability to meet that demand on some political aspect, on some social aspect. So I think that's important to point out, that I wouldn't, if that's the best that we can tout in terms of the productivity of gun laws, I'd be very cautious to buy those hook, line, and sinker as a net benefit. The second for the, so now that my long-winded spiel is out of the way, I think constitutional carry is a positive thing, because I think it's a recognition by the lawmakers that are in the states that are enacting that, to recognize that, some things are out of our control. And, the more we try to control the outcome of things, the more we end up just trampling on the Constitution by restricting our individual rights. And therefore, we're going to kind of let this problem solve itself. And you're absolutely right. The people, it will only hurt the law-abiding citizens. The only thing is, I would say it won't only hurt them. It will actually hurt all the other people that the law-abiding citizens could have protected had they they weren't worried about breaking the law. And I mean, you think about a perfect example, about maybe, I guess, a month or two ago. I can't remember when, it might have been in Indiana, where you had the 22-year-old in the mall with his fiance, I think days or something after they passed the constitutional carry, who was carrying legally under the protection of the Constitutional Carry Act. Mass shooter comes into the mall, starts shooting. He lands, I think, 9 out of 10 shots with his Glock 40 at 40 yards or something like that. I could be getting some of the detail there, but great shots, end up taking the life of this guy. Phenomenal shots. Had he, under pressure, like that's impressive. Had he not been able to carry, or had he been a concerned citizen who's weighing the pros, well, I don't want to break the law, maybe I won't carry it, and he wasn't there to stop that. Now you have how many untold bodies stacked up, innocent victims by these mass murders. So I'd say it doesn't just hurt that, it hurts the people that now will be victims of these crimes from the people who, we both are in agreement that will not care one iota. In fact, will probably take advantage of the fact that you have a less armed populace. I think the only real way to stop, at least in the short term, a lot of these shootings in these large crowded areas, malls, churches, whatever, is for, the enemy, the perpetrators of these, to recognize that, like, somewhere lurking out there is likely somebody that's going to fire back at me. And if these guys wanted a fair fight, they would have joined the military or the police. They wouldn't be doing what they're doing. So they're looking for an unfair fight. The minute that they all of a sudden don't get to rack up the body count to gain some level of fame that they think is associated with it, and this is not me demeaning these people as unhealthy or unwell. Just the fact of the matter is they're looking for attention, and the attention is gained by stacking up bodies, not by becoming, the first one killed because they walked into a room full of armed citizens. So I think the constitutional carry is a step in the right direction. And I will be really curious to see the correlation between the lack of mass shootings, or if there is one, the number of mass shootings in places that are constitutional carry states. Time will tell.
Yeah, you bring up
So, hey,
a
listen,
couple
Nick,
good points.
Please go ahead.
No, so I think, no, it's fine. It's the point that I feel like you made that probably drove it home for me, because I'm more on the side of probably more restrictive laws, but I could detail that if you want to know. But what you said about like the mindset of a perpetrator being that they're putting themselves in an advantageous situation, and then having, you know, the possibility of multiple people having weapons to respond. I think, like, it's just sad that that's required. I think that's awful. I don't like it, but it's the reality of things, is that in order to meet some of these threats, you have to have someone that's a threat themselves. And hopefully that threat is the one that's protecting those lives that you said would be affected by the people that are law-abiding citizens. So that's a fair point, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because it was something that I hadn't really thought of from that lens.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you here's an analogy that may or may not make sense. You know, if you have two banks, and one has, you know, security cameras, it's got barbed wires around the parking lot, there's the high plexiglass bulletproof walls, you know, there's a locked safe that only one person has the combination to. They have, you know, the SWAT team on speed dial and the red button, you know, like you see in the movies. Or you see a bank that has none of those things, and there's one teller that's got a cash register that doesn't lock, and the safe is wide open. Which one's most likely to get robbed? And I mean, it's kind of a simplistic one, but, you know, any thief worth his salt is going to be like, well, why would I go for the hard work when I can go for the easy work to get the same effect? And in the case of the mass shooter, the easy work is the body count. You know, that's why they go to these places. They don't go to NRA gun rights or hunting clubs. They don't do that.
Right.
Because they know there'd be,
yeah,
you know, they'd be you know, some of those people's, they've been waiting for a moment like that. So it's just, and that is, I wish it wasn't like that. I really do. But that is, you know, that is a reality that I think will, certainly as long as we're alive, and I think probably throughout history and for many more generations to come, will just be a fact of the matter that, you know, strength deters evil. So I got one more question for you. If you were a king for a day, and this actually might segue into what you were alluding to with some of your gun control, and please be as specified as you would like. If you were king for a day, what would you like to see happen in terms of gun control, gun reform, gun violence, any of the above?
Right. So I will tell you, I'll try to make this as short and sweet as possible. There are 50 states in the U.S., and 26 of them have some sort of permit that's required for them, like you said, not only to have a weapon, but also to concealed carry it. So there's levels to it. So nearly half have these laws. And I also alluded to the fact that a lot of the gun violence in Chicago stemmed from people being able to obtain weapons in nearby Indiana, to the point where actually a city in Indiana was sued for their involvement, and something around 113 confiscated weapons that were illegally held in Chicago but were purchased in Indiana. So what I'm trying to say is, I believe this is a state issue, but I believe that also, like, all states need to come together on this one and have like a strong mommy daddy front for these people, and make it so if you're wanting to be a gun carrier, I do not think that asking for them to have some level of training, 40, 60 hours worth of training, and then going through a permit process to conceal carry these weapons is too much to ask. I think it's a very easy ask over the course of 2 or 3 months of concerted effort to acquire weapons that you can concealed carry. I think that it will also, and obviously along with this is a background check that's a little bit more extensive than the one I experienced in my home state of Kentucky. So if that's too much,
interrupt you here for a second.
hit me.
Just to make sure. So are you talking about having those classes and the training necessary? Are you talking about in order to conceal carry, or are you talking about in order to purchase a handgun?
So in order to purchase a handgun, I think that they first. So for instance, motorcycle riding. I don't know if this isn't inherent everywhere, but in order in the military to have a motorcycle, you have to go through some training on that motorcycle. I think that there should be training in order to buy a weapon. Yes. In order to conceal carry, I think it just is a permit process that includes that background check that I mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Please continue.
Well, no, that's really where it ends there. I don't think that it needs to be more involved in that. I think that the training and the background check that's a little bit more than what I saw are enough to prevent a certain amount of these violent deaths that occur from mass shootings.
Right. Yeah, and you might be right. My fear, and this is where some of the disagreement comes in, is that now you're gaining a little ground by giving up far more ground. And one of the distinctions I'll make between that and the motorcycle or the car, and I'll quote Colin Noir, if anybody who's watching this wants to look him up, is probably the foremost modern day guns rights advocates, and he articulates. He's a former, I think he might still be a current attorney, former attorney. He has his own channel, Colin Noir. Fantastically well spoken, well thought out guns rights advocates who stated, not taking this from him, the difference being between the car, the motorcycle, and a gun is those things are privileges. They're not rights, explicitly laid out in the Constitution of the United States in the Second Amendment, without restrictions. And one of the, you could call it a slippery slope argument, but I don't think it's too far-fetched to really be considered slippery slope is, once you start involving the state at any level, so I say the state as a government and any centralized governmental level, you now open the door for corruption at its basis level to really muck up how that training is done, and what level of efficiency or sufficiency is required to ultimately attain the right you already had. So now we're kind of giving back that right by doing that. You open the door for it. Well, I certainly understand your point though. Like, I don't think anybody should handle a weapon without first having had some training, purchasing it, carrying it, whatever. You're a hazard to yourself and others, just as if you shouldn't drive a motorcycle or a car without first having learned how to do it properly and safely. At what level should the government get involved to mandate that and ensure it happens to some semblance of a standardized capability? I think it gets really, really slippery really quickly. So Nick, I'll close this out. Just kind of give you any closing shots, anything you want to say about your channel, Milk N Bourbon.
Oh man. Yours, sir. All right, how much time we got?
all time.
Right? Nah, man. I got a channel of my own. I don't talk nearly as much about hot button issues as Nick Cataldo seems that he is going to go and achieve. I enjoy these very much, and we've actually had this discussion before, but mine's a little bit more benign. I try a bourbon. I read a book. I talk about both.
Hey, not a lot of goodness can be found by reading books and drinking a little bit of bourbon with friends. So, Nick, it's been a pleasure having you on, man. Good talking with you. Hope we catch up soon.
Yeah, I look forward to the next one, buddy.
All right. See you later.